Okay, thanks so much. Hopefully everyone at this point has their caffeine and sugar and whatever else your favorite trick is for the late afternoon. This is a tough time for conversation, but I think you'll find it's going to be a very rewarding one. My name is Dominic Perry. I'm from the outskirts of the suburbs of Chicago, I should say. And for about the last 4 years, I've been the program manager for the Catholic Leadership 360 program. I've also, for about the last 15 years, been the principal for a small consulting group called the Essential Conversations Group, and we do work in dioceses around the country. I've worked in about 30 dioceses and about a dozen men's religious communities, and part of what I hope to bring along with our distinguished panel here is a little bit of insight as we kind of now look forward towards reading the signs of the times about what's emerging for our church, and engage you in a conversation then about what might be possible as we think about the future, the trends that are emerging, and the role that the roundtable can play in that. So as we've done before, we will have a short presentation from each of the three of us. I'll serve as both moderator and a panelist. And I'm joined by Megan O'Neill, who is an MBA and MA student at Boston College, as well as Father Larry Snyder, who is the former head of Catholic Charities USA and is now at the University of St. Thomas in Minneapolis. And I'll let both of them, as they come forward, tell you a little bit more about themselves. I want to just begin then in terms of our conversation to try to frame some of the things in the work that I've done in dioceses and religious communities and other groups in the church, some of the things that I see kind of emerging if we think about reading the signs of the times and what's emerging. And one of the things as I looked at my notes that I prepared, a number of these topics and themes have already come out in different ways. I think hopefully we'll see in this conversation now an opportunity for some convergence in our conversations that we've been having all day. The first thing that I notice as I work in the church around the U.S. is that I think we are finally, as a number of people have kind of alluded to, hopefully moving into kind of the post-scandal era. It has been 10 years or so since, more than 10 years since those the initial story broke in Boston. I think for that ensuing decade, so much of what certainly diocesan leadership and Episcopal leadership had to be focused on were the handling of the lawsuits and the very difficult financial conversations that had to be had and so forth. And we are now at a point where I think, hopefully, what I'm beginning to see is that is certainly no longer front and center for many diocesan leaders. They've got the opportunity to begin to think and focus and look forward. And I think the election of Pope Francis has only just fueled that. It's interesting to me that Francis was elected almost 10 years from the time that the first story in Boston broke. And I think he's brought this kind of energy and dynamism to our church globally, and I picked that up in terms of nationally as well. One of the things I'm noticing is that Francis is now, the energy he's bringing and sparking is bringing forward conversations that were dormant or perhaps much lower profile now are able to come up. The challenge, though, that I see from my perspective really is that we still have a number of great challenges for ourselves as a church, and what I'm hopeful but also cautious about is that we move from maintenance to mission. With the number of challenges that we have, we could simply kind of shift into a maintenance mode. And to some extent, I think at times we've been in that. How do we move to a missional mode? How do we really declare where it is that we want to go forward now that we have this opportunity of kind of getting our head above the challenges of the last 10 years with a dynamic Pope who's calling us to so much more? And so I want to pick up on that idea of moving from maintenance to mission. And what I see in a number of places that's very encouraging to me is how much more planning, proactive planning, is happening with each succeeding year. Dioceses for a number of years have been doing a variety of different forms of pastoral and strategic planning. What I've become very encouraged by is seeing how much it's happening with parishes and schools. So much so that I can think of Several Catholic school systems, one in particular, the superintendent has said every school in this diocese will have not only a strategic plan but a marketing plan to go with it, to really be, because the viability of those schools, as you know, is at stake. And then he then followed it up. This is the Diocese of Joliet outside of Chicago. He then followed it up by saying, and if anyone doesn't know how to do one, I'll supply a consultant to you who can help you do it. And identified a group of talented lay people from within the diocese to be able to help make that happen. So that it's the movement from maintenance to mission to looking forward to planning. What I see that's hopeful is a move down into our system to the parish and diocesan level. Another piece that I think is very hopeful is the emergence, and it's really a relatively new emergence, of leadership programs in our church. A few years ago at one of these, in one of the breakout sessions, Carol Fowler from the Archdiocese of Chicago and I sat down and did a session on leadership programs in the church. And Carol and I simply, in preparation, listed the various leadership programs that were available to people in parishes and diocesan level and so forth in our church. We were hard-pressed to name anything that went back before the year 2000. Pretty much everything that exists, from our Catholic Leadership 360 program to the Catholic Leadership Institute to a number of other things that are out there, the program that's at Villanova and church management and so forth, none of it goes back before about the year 2000. It kind of came on the church's radar, it seems, maybe in the late 90s, but certainly in the last 15 years or so. That's a very hopeful sign that's emerging, and I think it's a recognition of how important leadership is. And if you give me just a quick anecdote, around the year 2000 in a diocese, a major archdiocese of the U.S., one of my first consulting projects was they had surveyed all the priests of the archdiocese. And they asked them, name who you think the 10 best pastors in our diocese are. They took those 10 names that came up the most frequently, and I sat down with each of them for 90 minutes for each guy. I had a full script. And the idea was I was going to find out what the recipe for a great pastor was, okay? I was going to ask them everything from when they discerned their vocation to what seminary they went to where their first parish was, who was their first pastor, did they do ongoing formation, did they take their day off, did they have priest friends, lay friends, I had a whole thing. By the time I got to the 6th or 7th one, I was very depressed because I had to write a report, and there was nothing in common about these guys. Some of them hadn't cracked a book since they walked out the door of the seminary, and some of them read all the time. Some of them didn't take a day off. Some seemed to be quasi-workaholics, and others were religious about it. I couldn't figure out anything. And then what I figured out, I find as I reflected and prayed desperately, what I realized there was one thing that was in common for them. Does anybody know? They each knew who they were. They knew what their particular gifts were. And they had, on their own, built their pastorates and their priesthoods based on the gifts that they'd been given. And so one guy said, I am not a good preacher. I know I'm not a good preacher. He said, and he said, I do my preparation, but when I get up on Sunday morning, I have a 5-minute message and I sit out. That's not where my gifts are. My gifts are in one-to-one. He actually turned out to be one of the best fundraisers in the archdiocese, so much so that they elevated him up to the diocesan office of development. Another guy said, I'm a massive introvert. If I don't get 2 hours every afternoon, I go to the rectory from 4 to 6, I close the door. If I don't get 2 hours alone by myself in the rectory, I'm no good when those evening meetings come along. I say this only to make the point, in those years around 2000, if you were going to be an effective leader in the church, and certainly a priest, for the most part, you were on your own to figure it out. And God bless those guys who did, but a lot of other guys probably struggled a little bit more. We now have a number of programs that help our priests and lay leaders in our church to begin to think about what good leadership looks like and how they take the gifts that they've got and apply those. I would say I'm happy to hear several people today mention our Catholic Leadership 360 program, which that's a big component of what we're about, is helping guys understand, and we do it for lay leaders as well, but helping them to see themselves as others see them, understand their gifts, leverage them into leadership. But in terms of signs of the times, this piece about that we begin to become much more intentional both about our planning and developing our leaders, I think is a very hopeful trend, and I think it's a trend the Leadership Roundtable has a lot of good things to say about. Jim Lundholm-Eads alluded to this as well, what we see happening at certainly the diocesan level, and I think also the parish level, is a professionalization of the people who are in those roles. I would identify a couple of shifts, or a couple waves, for example, I might say. One of the things we were talking about at our tables is if you went to the average parish in the United States in the 1950s, what you would likely find, we're a big diverse church, so you can't say everywhere, but what you would have likely found was 3 priests and a secretary and a group of religious women running a school. And then what began to happen in the 60s and 70s and so forth is we began to hire lay people. And at first, the first wave of lay people who were hired were deeply dedicated, very well-intentioned, and not particularly trained for the roles that they got hired into. And what we've now seen happen, and I've noticed in the last 10 years, certainly at the diocesan level, I think also the parish level, is we're beginning to get people who are credentialed, certified for the roles that we're asking them to take on. Whether it be at a diocesan level, CFO, head of HR, running the Department of Evangelization, and similarly down at the parish level. That's a huge step forward in our church. And again, I think the Leadership Roundtable has and can play a role in that. The next step, though, I think, is helping those folks not only be experts in their own content, but also to be able to be effective leaders. That means breaking through silos. That means learning how to be proactive. That means learning how to work through what is at times a church bureaucracy that we're all too familiar with. I think that's a trend that we're moving in. I think that's a great place the Leadership Roundtable can be helpful in. Another piece that I see coming, that I've seen an awful lot of, and this is another wonderful thing, is we see a lot of second career professionals coming into the church. We've seen a couple of them up here today. Folks who are 50, 55, 60, had successful corporate careers, who want to serve the church and are bringing that expertise. That's a lot of what this organization's about. One of the things that I think is an opportunity for us is to think about how we help those people understand church culture, because what they will all tell you is this is a very different animal than the one I came from. And the way that decisions get made, the speed at which things are expected, the level of resources that are available, and a number of other things are just very different. And so I think an important place is, and all too often, hopefully not too often, but more than I care to see, what happens is some of those folks end up walking away in frustration. I wanted to help, I just couldn't figure out how to do it. I think that happens an awful lot at the parish volunteer level, and we're losing some great talent there. There's an opportunity there, and I think that's something for us to look at. I also think, this was alluded to as well, there is a great need in the last session. I think there's a great need for what I would call a theology of management, that we help people see that all this isn't add-on stuff. This is part and parcel of building a 21st century church. It's just good stewardship of our resources, and to help people to recognize that. All too often, I've had the privilege, I should say, of leading about and facilitating convocations of priests in over 20 dioceses in the United States. One of the laugh lines I get that I almost always get is I will say to the priests in the room, 100, 150, raise your hand if you went into the seminary because you wanted to be an administrator. Raise your hand if you went into the seminary because you wanted to manage people. This is not why guys become priests. And it can then feel like a secular add-on. It's this thing I gotta do to do the thing that I really want to do. And I think we have to help priests and all of the folks who are in leadership in our church to see this is deeply woven and integrated into the life of what it means to lead a community of faith that is going to be self-sustaining and around for a long time, and that can have the kind of impact that Danny Casey talked about this morning from the Vatican. One last trend, and I think it's a very hopeful one that I would point to, is I think we're seeing a rise of what I would call entrepreneurial Catholicism. And what I mean by that is, just take, for example, the area of parish life. In the last no more than 5 years, and I think it's less, we've seen the rise in the parish world of 3 particular groups, 2 fueled by the writing of books, that are now growing movements in parish life. The first came out of the parish outside of Baltimore. How many are familiar with the book Rebuilt, right? In Timonium, Maryland. That has now been leveraged into an annual conference that gets hundreds of attendees from around the country, of people coming to learn how this place became this vibrant parish. They've built an online association of parishes that are plugged in, and they're having regular webinars and sharing resources and so forth. 2 weeks ago, I was in Halifax, Nova Scotia for the first Divine Renovation Conference, led by a Canadian priest, a Scottish priest who lives in Canada now, James Mallon. And Father Mallon wrote a book called Divine Renovation, Moving Your Parish from Maintenance to Mission. 500 people. Let me tell you, Halifax, Nova Scotia is not easy to get to. And 500 people, John Hurley was there, and perhaps a few others, Dave Peckin was there. Went up to Halifax, a bishop was there, went up to Halifax to have this experience of this, and Father Mallon has built a Divine Renovation network to keep parishes plugged in. And the third, is a number of you are familiar with, is the Amazing Parish Movement, which has had 4 conferences in the last year and a half, and I think that over 1,000 parishes at this point over 500 parishes and close to 2,000 people have participated in those. In each of these cases, what I'm pointing to is that what's happening is that people are not waiting for an Episcopal blessing or a sign from leadership. They're just going off and launching, meeting a need that they see, and with the tools of the internet, they're able to very quickly connect and organize and bring people together. One of the questions I think for the leadership roundtable and all of us in the room is, how do we support that? How do we encourage that? These really are a set of very powerful tools when you've got the ability to connect people by video, email, and all the other ways that the internet allows for, by webinars and so forth. I'm going to quickly just end by saying I think there's also a few challenges that we are very well in this room suited to address as well, that are there for us if we think about going forward. And I'll tick through them very quickly. I think all of these are things that church culture pushes back against, and we have the ability to present an argument for. The first is metrics. I think church culture, by the common response I get from people, is to say metrics feel impersonal, and I think metrics are about good stewardship. The second is accountability. Accountability makes people feel, in the church culture, it's an uncomfortable concept. The priests that we work with in Catholic Leadership 360 often say, this is the first experience I've had of anybody giving me feedback on anything since seminary. That was a point that was made in our previous session. Well, at the same time, accountability and feedback give you the opportunity to know how well you're really serving. We can advance that argument. The third is around technology, and I think we got a little taste of that this morning. That, again, there's a feeling, I think, in the church world that our business is about person to person, sit in front of the person eye to eye. That's wonderful. But if you look again at what Father Mallon has done in Canada, and what the folks in Timonium, Maryland have done and so forth, use technology effectively, and you can start building virtual communities of people across the country. So those are some of the trends and maybe a few of the challenges that I see, and I'll turn it over to Megan now to give you her perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. As Dominic mentioned, I am a graduate student at Boston College. I'm getting a master's in theology and an MBA. It's a real degree program that does exist, although it's not very popular. I think I'm the third person to ever do it. So if you know of any aspiring Leadership Roundtable staff members, that might be a good degree for them to get. And I was involved in STEAM when I was at Stanford as an undergraduate. So since then, I've really followed all the work that the Roundtable has done, and I'm really honored to be here and speaking to you today. So I think it's hard to look at the future of the church and talk about it without talking about young people. So I have the honor and daunting responsibility of representing the elusive millennials. So I won't pretend to be a voice for all of my peers, but I will share with you some of the observations I have, and I'll leave you guys with a challenge that I think I would like to empower all of you to engage in a way that I'll explain. So a question that you might often get is, how do we get young people to church? How do we engage with the young people? And the real answer is there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. I've thought a lot about this. I've had a lot of great conversations with my family members, some of whom are church-going and some of whom are not. A lot of conversations with my peers at Boston College. Of course, in STEAM, I really encountered this challenge. How do we get young people to come back? And I think there are a lot of different strategies, but there is not one size fits all. So, that leaves us with kind of a blank slate, which can be kind of exciting because it means that there's a lot of room and a lot of opportunity for growth. And going along with that, I think that there are two key kind of assumptions or conversations that happen around young people, and I'd like to challenge those both right now. The first is the assumption that young people aren't involved in the church. And I think that's a false assumption. I think if you say young people don't go to Mass, I could probably say, sure, that's a pretty fair assessment. But if you look at people my age, they're involved in things like Jesuit Volunteer Corps and STEAM, and you can see the engagement with Pope Francis on Twitter. And I think that all of those are really true engagements with the church. They're just not maybe where you're looking for the young people to be. And what that can tell us is it's that idea of meeting people where they are, saying, why is it that the young people, I keep saying young people, but why is it that a big portion of the Catholic Church, of the Christian population, is not going to services over the weekend, but is still living out their Christian faith in other ways? And I think that tells you there's really a desire, and there is the fire of the Spirit living in this population, and we need to bridge that gap between the Eucharist and the other avenues for experiencing that. And the second thing that I'd like to challenge is that oftentimes you think about the future of the church and you say, well, the millennials or the young people or the next generation is going to come in and take over the church. And so we have to prepare it for them. We have to make that a smooth transition. And I think that is the wrong way to look at it. I think that creates kind of an us versus them mentality. And it creates a gap that's not there, obviously, because generations don't go in clear gaps. It's a continuum. So that's one piece. But I also think that it creates the idea that there's kind of an ownership. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because we're all cooperative in the church, and it's a co-ownership. It's we've talked about it. It's clergy and lay. It's old and young, men and women. We all have to be responsible. So considering that transition of ownership, I think, presents a really big challenge. And I think we need to move away from that. And part of the way that I would encourage us to really close that gap is by creating a culture in the church of inclusion and welcome. And I'd like to highlight 3 examples of parishes that I've visited that have really vibrant young adult populations. And I'll share with you some of the things that they do that I think are really successful. They're really simple, and they can be replicated. So the first is the Paullus Center in Boston. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to visit there, but they have a really vibrant young adult population. There's potlucks that have like hundreds of people every month. My roommates are really involved in that, and I feel like they're always baking brownies to take to the Paullus Center potluck, which is really awesome. And I went one time with my roommate, and I was really amazed because it's a small space, but after Mass, after we had all received communion, the priest invited anyone for whom this was their first time at the church to stand up and introduce themselves, if they'd like, in front of the whole parish. Can you imagine what message that kind of sends? It's showing that that you're welcome, and we want you here, and we want to know you. Not only do we want you to come, but we want to invite you to continue coming. And so I introduced myself, and after everyone had introduced and we sang the recessional hymn, I think at least 3 people came over and individually introduced themselves as well. And imagine someone my age. A lot of people have had challenges, have had disagreements with the church, and so it takes a lot to go back to church if you don't know anyone. And you have scenario 1 where you show up and the same people have been sitting in the same pews for years, and people might smile and introduce themselves, but it can be impersonal. That's option 1. Or option 2, you introduce yourself, people come up to you, invite you to the potluck or whatever it is. Now, which one of those are you going to go back to the next week? I think for me, it's definitely the one where I feel welcomed and known, and that if I don't show up, people will notice. So that's the first example. The second example is Resurrection Parish in Aptos, California. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it is a wonderful parish, and something that they do before every single service, or every one I've been to at least, the priest and the deacon, they get up and they have the same script that they sing every single Mass. And it goes something like, are you married? Are you single? Are you gay? Are you straight? Will you belong with us? And the entire parish then sings a chorus of "You belong with us." And that really sends a message, I think. It sends a message to the parish, that the parish is singing those words and encouraging that sense of inclusion and belonging. And it sends that message to newcomers that wherever they're at, they're welcome there. And again, I think that goes a long way with people my age and people of any generation, really. But for someone for whom going to Mass is a challenge, that message goes a long way. And the third example is another church in Boston, and they have routinely at almost every Mass, but particularly the young adult Mass, which is Sunday nights, the pews are always full. And it's the kind of Mass that you go to because you want to go to Mass. And the priest every week gives a homily that is probably 30 to 45 minutes. And so the Mass every week is routinely an hour and a half long. And there are young people who choose to spend their Sunday nights, they commute in from all parts of Boston to go to a longer Mass than normal. Now what's going on there? I think the key there is that the message that the priest gives every week is really, it's intellectual, it's really well-founded, it engages them, it talks to the young people there as if they're there to learn. It's really theological, and I think it demonstrates that people are craving to be challenged, or they're craving to know more, they're craving knowledge, they're craving opportunity, they're curious. And this kind of Mass with this extended homily is satiating that curiosity. So I'm not saying that every Mass should be an hour and a half and that every homily should be 45 minutes, but this particular priest has a gift for producing really challenging and intellectual homilies that has really been successful. So another thing that I just want to mention is that if you think about where millennials are, I'm in my mid-20s and I've lived through 3 popes and lived through the scandals. I've grown up, transitioning from a non-technological world to a really high tech-centric world, and we're kind of trained to be skeptical because of a lot of the things that have gone on in the time that we've grown up. And I think that skepticism is something really to be aware of, because it means that there's going to need to be that invitation for us to engage, and that there's going to need to be a reaching out rather than just kind of a passive waiting. And for myself, and I think that I can speak for a lot of my peers, I would love to be invited. I would love to be engaged. And I think as we're talking about some of these cultural changes in the councils, parish councils and finance councils, I challenge you to think about if there are young people in your parishes that could be invited to participate in that. Because if in fact we are going to be transitioning to the next leaders of the church, we need to learn what it is that we're going to be leading. And we need to learn what it means to be a really dynamic member of the parish. And there are really simple ways to do that. And I really think it just starts with the invitation and the opportunity to be included. So those are some of my thoughts, and thank you for listening. And I will turn it back over to Father Snyder.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little ancient. Megan says she's lived now through 3 popes. I think I'm on my 7th, so a little more time there. Anyway, I know we're supposed to be addressing the future and trying to figure out what are some very positive and hopeful things that are happening, and I have to begin by saying that I make no claim to be able to see into the future, but I think there are trends that are happening that can give us some really good insight about positive things about that. We're talking about the Francis effect, so I'd like to approach the Francis effect through maybe the lens of organizational change. When Francis was elected, I think it was very clear that he was tasked with being an agent of change. But what kind of change was he tasked with? I would say that it's probably, if we look at it, it's kind of the back to the future change. Because if you look at everything Francis does, it's like he's taking the foundational gospel principles and making them come alive again in a new way, for my generation anyway. But he went back to the foundations and has once again made it very much alive. Like John Paul II and Benedict XVI, I think he certainly is trying to affirm the mission of the church. But they frequently defined it in opposition to the world. Whereas Francis, I think, is very much a proponent of engagement with the world and especially dialogue with the world, which is when we think of him as being an agent of change, many of the challenges he had are the same challenges that a new CEO would have. When we think about organizational change, it has many components, some of which would be an evaluation of the structure that you have, an evaluation of the process systems that you use, a definition of skills, both organizational skills that are required and individual skills, a definition of shared values, which will pull us together as we work together, and then finally, modeling preferred behavior. All of those things, I think, are part of culture change when you're doing change management. I just want to make a few comments about that would focus on Francis's values and style, because I think there are a few themes that are very obvious to me. If I asked each of you to write down 3 themes that you see over and over again in Francis's teachings, my guess is we'd all come up with maybe 3 different themes, but there would be a lot of convergence, a lot of congruity. But these are the 3 that speak to me. And the first is inclusion. I know that you hear very frequently that Francis focuses on poverty. And he certainly does. That's a huge issue for him. And he talks about being a poor church for the poor. But that's one piece, I think, of what he does. It's actually much more. For him, it's whoever is being excluded, whoever is being forgotten. It's kind of Jesus reaching out in the Gospels to the people who are always standing at the edges, at the fringes. So to me, this thing of inclusion, Francis is always looking to see who are we leaving out. The second is mercy, which especially in this Holy Year of Mercy has given us all, I think, a lot to think about. But just a simple thought about that is that mercy is not the same as compassion, because mercy goes beyond compassion. Compassion tends to be an empathetic response or feeling to a situation, whereas mercy has to entail action. It goes beyond just a feeling to action, and it has to then mitigate suffering. And this again, over and over again, when Francis looks at the plight of migrants, he's saying we can't just be concerned or feel bad. We have to mitigate the suffering of these people. And the third, something that's been said several times today as well, is accompaniment, a word that I think is a real challenge to us. But accompaniment challenges us to go beyond judgment of others to acceptance of them and the respect that they are due, and walking with them on their journey, and sometimes even asking their forgiveness, which of course has gotten Francis in a few pots of hot water, but anyway. When we look at the future, I think it's very clear that Pope Francis is reshaping the papacy as we know it. But it's also like he then turns and looks at us and says, what are you waiting for? We all have parts of the church that we need to reshape as well. When we think of those three themes that I talked about and their impact on organizational structure and life, I think some of the things are just simply normative. Okay, for example, the model of leadership that we have here should be servant leadership. And he certainly has talked time and time again against clericalism that he sees in the church, that it should have no place there. But he also talks about transparency and accountability, but through engagement. And again, something that impresses me is that he is especially concerned about the role of women in the church, and that he affirms their value and the role that they should have. So what does all that have to say to our parishes and our organizations? Well, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that I think he's calling us also to go back to the future. First of all, in the sense of our beginnings in this country, to the first century and a half of the Catholic Church in this country. At that time, we were a church of the poor. We were an immigrant church primarily. And we really did experience religious discrimination. So how did we survive? Well, parishes and the organizations, the systemic organizations that we came up with to respond to the plight of immigrants, such as education, healthcare, social services, all of those things, but especially the parish on which the other three are built, became lifelines for people that gave them the skills that they needed to assimilate to this new life. As we look to the future, though, I think there is a difference between what happened then, because at that time, the style was very much parochial. But that was the times in which we responded to these things, so that Catholics took care of Catholics, just like the Lutherans took care of Lutherans, and so why we have so many different faith-based organizations in this country. As we look at the future, I think it can no longer be parochial. It has to be interfaith. We have to work with other people of good faith and other people perhaps of no faith. The challenge for us should be not how are Catholics faring, which was a major concern back then, but simply how are the poor faring? How are those who have been excluded faring? Are we standing with them? Because that, I think, for Francis is a huge part of the mission of the church. A very visual example for me is that down the road from St. Thomas, about a mile, is our sister school of St. Catherine. And about 100 years ago, if you were there were a lot of people running around with black veils. And it was the Sisters of St. Joseph, right? Well, today, if you go there, there's a lot of people running around with black veils. But it's not the Sisters of St. Joseph. It is rather the Muslim women who are being educated there. So it shows how the mission of the church, the mission of St. Catherine, has changed over time. We've talked about the plight of Catholic schools in the inner city, which have, many of them have been closed because many Catholics moved to the suburbs, and so we're no longer there educating Catholics, and financially it became not a very viable thing for dioceses to do. So what has happened since then is given rise to other entities like Cristo Rey schools, and I know there are many more, who are taking up the mission because it's still a valid mission for us. So again, they don't have a new mission. They went back to the future, but the mission may be lived out differently, but it's the same mission. The second thing I think that we really need to do is to go back and reread the documents of Vatican II, because they have been so formative on Pope Francis. So it's like we need to go back to the reform and once again be enlivened by that. I think if we do those two things, they could really help reshape our future, or not reshape, but shape our future. Interesting thing would be to do a SWOT analysis of the Catholic Church. And I'm not going to do that, except to make a comment about if we looked at opportunities, I think we could come up with a ton of opportunities, and to look at the incredible force for positive things that Pope Francis has been. But I would like to focus on one threat if we were doing a SWOT analysis, and it's what I would call the tyranny of bureaucracy. Because, and maybe I'm just getting this from having spent 10 years in Washington, D.C., I don't know. But there, you get politicians who come in and they're so excited, they just get reelected and they're going to change the world, and they sometimes are even able to pass legislation. But things don't change necessarily all that much, because who is entrusted with actually implementing these new laws? Well, the bureaucrats, right, who are there. And sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't, but they have the power to really embrace or not to embrace the legislation. The church is a bureaucracy. We actually took our structure from the Roman Empire, so it's just natural that we should be. And so as we look at that bureaucracy, I'm wondering, are the generals and the foot soldiers of the church behind Pope Francis? And there are those who sometimes doubt that. So for example, in the press, we saw in a few meetings that the U.S. bishops had, that people looked at their agenda and they compared the speeches and teachings of Pope Francis, and they said, there seems to be a disconnect here. Now, I will say that more recently, you see much more coming out of the Bishops' Conference on immigration and gun control, all of these things that I think are moving them more into those things. But, I think we have to be careful. Is there a tyranny of bureaucracy in the church? Actually, having said that, I have to say I'm very hopeful, because these things take time. These things take time, and I think that Pope Francis is inspiring leadership in the church. Just an anecdote here. There was an archbishop in my archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, called Archbishop John Ireland, who was a visionary man who did a lot of amazing things, but he was asked by the Bishops' Conference of the time to talk about the future of the church, and this was back around 1900. And he went on and on, waxed eloquently, as was the style at the time. But at the end, he said, but there is only one thing we need to know, and that is, as we will it, so shall the future be. It's not dependent upon any other thing, but do we will it? I'm very encouraged by this gathering of people here, because it shows we do have a will. And that's what I want to end with, is to salute the Leadership Roundtable for the things that you are doing, that you have developed, that you continue to do, because I think you definitely fall in that space that Jim talked about today, the space between the is and the ought. You are moving us towards the ought. And so with that, thank you for the opportunity to making a few comments today, but also just to say I'm very hopeful for this organization and the impact they're having in the church.
Okay, as you've done before, you'll now have a chance to have a conversation at your table, but I want to change the game just a little bit in this sense. There are 3 questions in your booklet, and what I'd like to have us do is to work towards, as your tables, work towards identifying your answers to the questions. So instead of having questions for the panel, instead, the first question asks about what are the major trends that you can identify. So hopefully we prime the pump a little bit, but as all of you talk at your table, what are the trends that you see that we need to be paying attention to as we move forward? Secondly, what are the places that you see reasons for hope? And third, where are the opportunities for partnership with the Leadership Roundtable? For some of you, the organizations that you represent or with, you might see the opportunity for direct partnership. In other cases, you might see opportunities for the Roundtable to partner with some other entity in the church. But when we come to the time of discussion, I'd like to encourage, I mean, certainly you can ask questions of any of the three of us about comments we made, but I'd also like to be very interested to hear what are the trends, what are the hopes, what are the potential partnerships that having reflected, that as you had a conversation, emerged at your table, okay? We'll give you a good chunk of time to be able to do that, maybe to about 10 after or so, 5, and then we'll have some time to hear from the various tables and what some of the things coming forward are, all right? So this is your chance to try to integrate this around trends, hopes, and partnerships. Okay, so as we said, there were kind of 3 areas of focus around trends and hopes and potential partnerships. I'll start with trends, but we can also kind of jump around a little bit. And this is an opportunity, again, as before, we have the mics just to get a sense of what came out at your tables as we look forward and the possibilities and trends and hopes. When you want to get us started? Yes, okay. Here he comes, okay. Did we have one over here? Yes, Bishop? They're pointing at you.
One of the first things to emerge at our table, Bishop brought up was, that's why we're pointing at him, was his idea, was that both a trend and a source of hope is the Hispanic Catholic Church. And we talked about the engagement, how the church needs to adapt the way it has traditionally been to this new immigrant, relatively new immigrant population. We've always been an immigrant church. Here's a new, relatively new immigrant church in some ways, at least, that we need to continue to see as a source of hope and welcome and include.
Great, thank you. And again, how about if each person just kind of say who you are and where you're from and so forth. John?
John Hurley from Santa Clara University, and I just want to lift up Megan's comments before, not only about the Paullus Center in Boston as a Paulist, but I think the whole sense of engaging the young church in leadership roles, and for the rest of us to stop talking about them. And I think as I work with parishes around the country, I think the key thing is that the young church need to be on the pastoral councils if we're going to even begin to start thinking differently. Otherwise, we're always not even going back to the future. We're talking about, science fiction if we're trying to figure out what somebody else's mindset might be. And I think that's getting out of the box. And I think that's, a powerful dimension on the leadership issue. I think the other trend that I've seen also that Megan addressed is the Sunday night experience. That this has become almost, as I've sensed around the country, a ritualized way for young families and young adults to wind down the weekend. There's no mass exodus after communion, as there is in most churches, at other mass times. And I think we need to be attuned to that because something's happening there. The Sunday night masses are no longer like they were in the 70s, the last mass in town attitude. They're a powerful opportunity where young families come together. We have a lot of youth programs beginning to happen, and our young adults engage and come together and network and very often go out and get something to eat afterwards, which offers parishes a lot of creative opportunities. So I just want to lift up those 2 dimensions that Megan was talking about because I've just witnessed the vitality that this brings to the parish community, which I think is a very powerful opportunity there.
I'll just build one thing very quickly on younger folks, and this goes back to something I meant to say when I talked about entrepreneurial Catholicism, is I'm seeing lots of folks in their 20s and 30s who are very entrepreneurial, and they are deeply dedicated Catholics who are doing everything from web design to sound production to music to blogging and so forth. And absent the institutional church necessarily giving them a platform, they're just creating it. And they're going out there and they're building contracts with parishes and dioceses and so forth. And these are very creative, innovative people who are kind of finding their way, and they're doing a nice job of it as young entrepreneurs. But for those of us who kind of sit from this post to say, what can we do to be calling them forth, encouraging them, helping them to see that their gifts are very wanted and needed in our church, I think is another potential option for us. Okay, what else? Trends and hopes. Yes, Maureen.
Another trend.
Tell us who
that
you are.
Pardon me?
Tell us who you are.
Oh, Maureen Gallagher from the Reed Group. Another trend that we talked about was the trend to collaboration, to greater partnerships, both within the church and partnering with people not in the church. We talked about in dealing with drugs and dealing with schools, et cetera, that there's lots of ways to collaborate, and that silos are no longer in fashion, but collaborative partnerships are. And another opportunity would be, given the political scene that we have right now, particularly in terms of the presidential race, there are a lot of opportunities to do education in terms of social justice. Another collaborative thing might be working on ecology. Again, certainly the Pope has spoken out on it, but we can get groups of people that aren't Catholic to keep on working on saving the planet.
Can I come?
Yes, of course. Yes.
I just, I don't know if this is on. Oh yeah, there. I think that addresses a lot of what I see that people my age are engaging in kind of unique ways in the collaborations, and I think that I totally agree, and I think that some of the things you mentioned would be really wonderful ways to bring in the younger generations as well, especially the political advocacy and social justice. I think that is a really important piece.
Okay. What else? Does anyone talk about, in particular, potential partnerships and places people can partner with the Roundtable? Okay. Yes. Okay. Peter.
That far in our agenda, but
Peter,
I've
just
got
tell
one
the
that
room who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry, Peter Pursuti from Arthur J. Gallagher. One idea that I've been working with a little bit is the Young Catholic Professionals. I don't know if you're following them, Megan, but I'm very excited about, this is an MBA student, Jennifer, who's based out of Dallas, and did a case study on this gap of, age 21 to 40 of college graduates who leave their Catholic campuses, perhaps now end up in this urban centers of Chicago, et cetera, and they're looking for like-minded sorts of folks. And so she's, I think, in about 12 chapters. She thinks it costs about $50,000 to start a chapter. She was just in Cleveland, but it's just a very exciting group. I think that would be a great, the Young Catholic Professionals, YCP. It's a nonprofit, has a website, and it's trying to help the church really get that age group. So, Young Catholic Professionals.
So she's got a website up and she's
Yep.
doing this. Is that
Yes,
right?
she is, and
Yeah.
I can share it with whomever, whatever.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Here we go. Bob, tell us who you are and where you are.
Bob Boulogne, Yale. I wonder if we can use the media in dioceses to highlight success stories. Years ago, when we finished Renew in the Archdiocese of Hartford, a group of us went to the Archbishop and asked him to establish a full-time office for small Christian communities. And he said he would, but he said, show me model parishes. And I wonder if there are model parishes within dioceses or model dioceses within the country that could be using the standards for excellence, for example, and then writing it up in the diocesan newspaper and getting the story out of success stories that are going on using your material.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. I know it's been a long day. I want to going once and going twice. Trends, hopes, partnerships. Okay. All right. Well, then I'm going to invite Carrie forward. We've got one. Yes, Katie, come on.
Sorry,
Be brave.
I'm as per the usual. I'm always brave. One thing that we did talk about was the idea of the partnerships that we at our table is something that is that this is a really special experience to be at the annual meeting together, to be in a room full of so many like-minded people who are looking for that. We do share these hopes that we are hopeful that we will be able to move forward, that these managerial best practices are something that we want to instill in our diocese and within our parishes. And it's a really exciting thing and a wonderful thing for all of us to be here together in this room. And that's something, in a way, that the people at my table were just talking about. It's a great way to partner, is that we can partner with one another. Everybody is like-minded. We want to be successful. And the best way for us to do that is to do it together. So that was just one way that we thought.
Great. Thank you. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to invite Carrie forward to kind of wrap us up for the day. Thanks, Carrie.
So Dominic, it's a real pleasure for my colleagues and me at the Leadership Roundtable to include you on our team running Catholic Leadership 360. Father Snyder, your 10 years as president of Catholic Charities USA, consistently, Catholic Charities USA was singled out as a model of financial transparency and best managerial practices. It's been an honor to have you be part of the creation of the Leadership Roundtable. And Megan, you are a reason for my hope. Most definitely, a young, brilliant Catholic woman who, despite all odds, is tenacious and gracious about putting yourself forward and making sure that you have qualifications and the pedigree, and you will not give up until you are running the church. So. Thank you all the panelists today were fabulous, all of you, the participants. We have a saying at the Leadership Roundtable that every single one of the participants could be a keynote in your own right. I am deeply grateful for the level of engagement and discussion, both in plenary session and at the tables. Please visit our brand new website, which was just unveiled yesterday. You will find many more resources about the programs and services of the Leadership Roundtable. You can continue this discussion online by joining CatholicStandardsForum.org, also found on our website. Please take the encouragement and the hopefulness, the ideas and the synergies that you experienced here and become ambassadors of the Leadership Roundtable's mission. And please be on record, if you are not already, as a donor supporting this important work, and encourage anyone you know who believes in this mission to likewise contribute and be on record. You have probably seen evaluations at your table, and we encourage you to fill those out and return them to the registration desk in the hallway. But you may also have received by now an electronic evaluation, which you can fill out at your leisure. This helps us plan ongoing activities and certainly will inform how we organize next year's meeting. I want to thank Faith Direct and the Connolly Foundation for their support of this particular gathering, and especially thank the event planning staff, my extraordinary colleagues on staff at the Leadership Roundtable, my colleagues on the Leadership Roundtable board, and all of you for being here. So your agenda says that cocktails begin at 6. I pulled a few strings and they begin now. So we have to look forward to tonight's banquet, celebrating and honoring Father Paul Holmes and Tom Healy, and the festivities will be wonderful and inspiring, I promise. Thank you.